So now let's get into the Nearpod activities applications, which while I like the content applications, it's the activity applications that are actually my favorite. And those are the applications within Nearpod that I tend to use most commonly. So again, in Nearpod, once you've created a lesson, you would go to your add slide option either here or here. You would click on that, and then it automatically defaults to the content applications, which we've already covered. However, you're going to click on activities here. Many students, or excuse me, many teachers miss that and are wondering where to find these different applications. And there are a number of different applications that you can use. There are 10 different applications. What I will tell you is we just did the matching pairs. That was the activity I had you match the content application with its description. Matching pairs is really good for vocabulary, learning terms, things like that. It's a very rote memorization, lower level type of skill, in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. I don't tend to use it a ton. The kids tend to like it. The other two things that I haven't really used myself are the fill in the blanks, which I find more as a way to test the students, again, on vocabulary or sentence completion, something along those lines, and the memory test, which is basically just like a game of memory that students have to match multiple images, pictures, words, things like that. These three applications I don't tend to use a lot. I think that they're more geared towards elementary level teachers, maybe teachers that are teaching preliminary literacy skills and numeracy and things like that. What I tend to use most commonly are the climb to the top, the open-ended question, the quiz function, Flipgrid, the draw it feature, the collaboration or collaborate board, and the poll option. So as you're familiar, let's start with those that you've seen already. So the poll option is just what it sounds like. It's just like if you were to use an external application like Poll Everywhere, or if you were to use the poll feature within Dino, it's the same thing, except you don't have to go outside of Nearpod to do it. You would type your question in up here, and you can give various options for students to respond. So I like to use the poll option after I have covered a portion of a lesson. For example, I may use it after I do my direct practice. I may use it for a check for understanding, or I may use it as a sort of dipstick to let me know student understanding. For example, how comfortable are you with the do what strategy? Very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, not very comfortable, not comfortable at all. I tend to use it at those transition moments within my lessons. And it works very, very well. So it gives you immediate results. What I love about the poll feature is that you are able to share the results anonymously with your students. So for example, I recently, we read a short story, and it was about a student who was addicted to video games. And so I did a poll question about how many hours students had spent with video games over the break. And the responses were overwhelming. The number of kids, almost 75% of one of my classes said they spent 2 to 3 hours a day, which is just staggering and scary at the same time. But when I shared it, it was very interesting because they were either 2 to 3 hours or no hours. And so the kids had a very interesting conversation, and it was a great way to introduce the topic. Just like all the other features within the activities applications, there is an option for a timer, although I don't tend to use it much. You also do have your option to add video, audio, media, things of that nature. And you can allow your students to answer verbally, although I really don't tend to use that quite a bit. So the poll feature was something you've already seen, something you might use quite a bit. The other application that I tend to use quite a bit is the open-ended questions. So for our sake, the open-ended question is just what it sounds like. It could be a short answer, it could be a journal, it could be an essay. Basically, you type a question here. You can also put a math question here. So for those of you that are math-minded individuals, you're able to also put a math problem up here. And the students read it in the upper box, and then a secondary box opens down below. Again, same features. In this case, open-ended, I do tend to use the timer most commonly. Just be sure as you're beginning to use the timer with students, with students, just make sure that you are letting the students know that within the student application side of Nearpod, the student-facing side, that the timer will turn yellow to warn the students that time is winding down, and it turns red when students absolutely need to submit an answer. And when you're doing a Nearpod and you have it timed, if the time lapses out and the students do not submit an answer, there is no way for you as a teacher to go back and reopen that slide without having to reopen the entire slide deck. So it can be very challenging, although it does keep that sense of urgency going. You do also have an option for student recordings if you choose to. Although I tend to find that if I'm going to do student recordings, I tend to use Flipgrid because really, ultimately, that's what it's for, right? So the other things that I use within the activities features are the quiz feature, which is just like the open-ended question, except in this case, they are multiple choice questions. They aren't necessarily a quiz per se. You don't have to grade them like a quiz, but they definitely have definitive right and wrong answers. You're able to add as many different options as you want. You could add multiple quiz questions, one right after another. So say you were having the students read a chapter in a social studies text and you wanted to check for understanding, you could ask 10 different questions to check, and you would simply just keep adding a question down here. Again, audio, video, imagery, if you needed to add those things in. I do tend to put a lot of reference guides over here, my PDFs, things like that. If it's a question and related to a particular protocol, I might put it there. And you do have a timer here. That's up to you. I don't tend to use it all that much with quizzes because I think they tend to go a little bit quicker anyway. The last few features within the activities options and applications are a little bit more complicated. So let me start with the easier of the options. The Collaborate board, or the collaboration board, as I often refer to it with my students, is very much like a Padlet. If you tend to like Padlet and you like the way Padlet works within your classroom, this is a great option for you to use with your students. I love the Collaborate board. I like to use it at various times within my classroom. I use it a great deal with writing. I use it a lot with collaborative brainstorming. I use it with students in terms of when we're doing readings and I ask them to lift a line that's significant or important. When they lift the line, they then put it in the Collaborate board. And I've also used it as an activator. So I might ask a question and the students are able to answer within the Collaborate board. So there's a ton of different options. When you use the Collaborate board, there are 5 different formats that you can choose to use, whichever one you tend to like. Doesn't really matter. You could put your topic or question up here. It does allow you to put an image there. And when you go to save it and apply it, just know that there are 2 different options, just like Padlet. You do have the option to approve the students' responses prior to submission, or you can allow them to auto post, in which case it posts in real time and they're able to see the other students' responses in real time. The Collaborate board does also allow students to add images as responses, which they love. The only thing I would warn you about with that is you do get students that want to put images up and not actually put any text. So if you're going to use the Collaborate board, you should definitely have a lesson in what your expectations are with it. I really have used it very well for a lot of brainstorming and collaborative write-arounds and things like that, and we've gone back to it quite a bit. So I highly recommend the Collaborate board. Students like it, and you tend to get a lot more engagement within that application. The Draw It feature. So I spoke when I talked about content applications, I spoke to you about how there was a PDF viewer and you were only able to view the PDF. You couldn't actually do anything with it. Well, if you want to upload a PDF into Nearpod and you want the students to actually be able to do something with it, so for example, maybe it's a math problem and you want them to be able to, mark math problem up, work through the math problem right directly below it. Maybe it's a text and you want them to be able to annotate it. The Draw It feature is where you do that. So those of you that are familiar with Kami, the application Kami, that is an overlay on PDFs, most commonly used within Google Classroom, but Kami and Draw It work very similarly. Basically, you upload a PDF, and the Draw It feature within Nearpod allows the students to add text boxes, highlighters, and mark it up features. It works great. The only words of warning I'm going to give you with the Draw It feature is it takes some finagling to get used to it. You are able to put your directions up top, and again, audio, visual, imagery supports if you need to. Timers there again. When you put your image up, I would tell you, take your time, get used to it. The images that post up, sizing is an issue. You can't post an entire 8.5 by 11 page and have the students able to annotate that. Nearpod just doesn't allow it. Nearpod, you'd have to kind of chunk the text and go a little bit smaller. So I'll tell you that first of all. And then the second thing I'll tell you is it takes some time for the kids. Learning how to manipulate the text and learning how to use the annotation tools within Nearpod. You know, it took my students a day or two to be able to figure out how to do that. So when you go to upload your PDF, you can do a PDF, a JPEG, or a PNG file, and you can upload it from the cloud, Dropbox, Google Drive, or from your own computer. And once you upload, so let me see what I've got here. Let's say I were putting this up here, although I wouldn't, it's a short story. I'm going to collapse my instruction page. Notice how small it posts. So this is an 8.5 by 11. Notice how small it is. You know, I really have to do a magnification. It allows me to move it. And then when I reset, it takes away everything I've done. So it's very important that if you're going to use the Draw It feature, that as you're making changes, that you're saving things, okay? And that would allow you to be able to save whatever you need within your Nearpod. Again, take your time with the Draw It feature. Let us know if you have any questions. It just takes a little bit of finagling with it. The other pieces are the Flipgrid. So there's a direct integration with Flipgrid. You would simply need to put the URL link here and then your administrative link here, which is if you click on share within a Flipgrid, that would enable the students to go directly into Flipgrid and answer whatever question. You would have to have a Flipgrid account, although the students do not need to have one. Word of warning about Flipgrid is that it grades, it doesn't show you the students' participation in Flipgrid. It only counts the participation. Ms. Terrell will talk about the grading and the rosters and things like that, but it only shows you that the kids opened this actual slide within Nearpod. It doesn't show you what they did with it. So you would have to go to Flipgrid to actually look at what they did within Flipgrid. So just be aware of that before you use it. Again, though, great topic for those, or great option for those speaking and listening standards, and the kids tend to love Flipgrid. And then the last thing is the student's favorite, and it's one that I tend to use whenever possible because it just really is a high engagement tool. I tend to put a climb to the top at the end of my lessons, and I tell my students that if we move quickly and the engagement is good, we will end with a climb to the top, and it tends to really increase buy-in. So climb to the top is the exact same thing as what you'd expect from a Kahoot or what you'd expect from a quizzes. Basically, it's questions about a reading or questions about something you've covered within the the Nearpod. And basically, the students are able to make their little emoji and they can personalize it, and then you set the background, what you want the background to be. Himalayan mountains, the Arctic, you know, they had a winter chalet for Christmas. They change it periodically. You set it, you start the game, and then the game automatically in Nearpod filters the questions for the students. And the students are assessed based on their speed of their response and the accuracy of their response. And